The House That Remembers. Amityville, New York, November 13th, 1974. The Dutch colonial house at 112 Ocean Avenue stood sideways on its narrow waterfront lot like a watchful sentinel, its gambrel roof and quarter-circle windows staring out over the dark waters of the Amityville River. Locals called it High Hopes because Ronald DeFeo Sr. had hung that optimistic sign on the front lawn when he moved his family in back in 1965. 9 years later, the sign was still there, weathered and peeling, but the hopes inside had long since curdled into something rotten. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums like cotton wool soaked in dread. Ronald Butch DeFeo Jr., 23 years old, broad-shouldered and wired on a cocktail of booze, LSD, and whatever else he'd scored that week, sat in the basement with the .35 caliber Marlin rifle across his knees. The weapon felt warm, almost alive, as if the house itself had handed it to him. Upstairs, his family slept. Or so he told himself. His father, Big Ron, 43, a car salesman with a heavy hand and a louder voice. His mother, Louise, the same age, who still flinched when her husband raised his arm. Dawn, 18, pretty and rebellious. Allison, 13, quiet and bookish. Mark, 12, all energy and noise. Little John Matthew, just 9, who still believed in monsters under the bed. Butch stood slowly. His boots made no sound on the carpeted stairs. The house seemed to hold its breath with him. He moved like a shadow through the hallways he'd known his whole life. First to his parents' room on the second floor. The door creaked once, soft, almost inviting. Big Ron lay on his back, snoring. Louise stirred, her eyes fluttering open in the dim glow from the hallway nightlight. "Butch, what are you—" The first shot was deafening in the confined space. The second followed, before the echo died. Blood sprayed across the headboard in a perfect arc, like abstract art painted by the devil himself. Butch didn't stop. He couldn't. The house wouldn't let him. He went room by room. Dawn tried to sit up, her mouth opening in a scream that never came. One shot. Allison clutched her teddy bear even as the bullet tore through her. Mark and John never even woke up fully, face down, hands raised above their heads in some instinctive surrender, as if the house had already told them resistance was pointless. When it was over, Butch walked back downstairs, the rifle still smoking. He stepped outside into the cold November air, the river lapping gently against the bulkhead like it was applauding. No neighbors stirred, no dogs barked. The gunshots had been swallowed whole by 112 Ocean Avenue. At Henry's bar down the street, Butch burst in around 6:30 p.m. the next evening, eyes wild. "You gotta help me! I think my mother and father are shot!" By the time the police arrived, the house had already begun its work. The bodies lay exactly as they'd fallen, face down, hands raised, no signs of struggle, no fingerprints that didn't belong. The smell of cordite lingered, but something else underneath it, a sweet, cloying rot, like flowers left too long on a grave. Butch told the cops a mob hitman had done it. Later, in custody, he changed his story a dozen times. Finally, he admitted it. "Once I started, I just couldn't stop," he whispered during interrogation. "The house, it was talking to me. Voices, telling me they had to go. All of them." The jury didn't buy the insanity defense. In November 1975, Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 6 consecutive terms of 25 years to life. The house sat empty for 13 months after the murders. Real estate agents whispered about it. Buyers walked in, felt a sudden drop in temperature, and walked right back out. Bad vibes, they'd mutter, like someone's watching. Then, in December 1975, George and Kathy Lutz came looking for a bargain. December 18th, 1975. George Lutz was a big man, 6'3", ex-Marine, with calloused hands from years in the construction business and a no-nonsense attitude that had served him well in Vietnam and in marriage. Kathy was smaller, softer, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. They'd been married a couple of years, blending their families. Kathy's 3 kids from her previous marriage, Danny, 9, Chris, 7, and Missy, 5. And that dog, Harry, a lovable mutt who barked at everything and nothing. The price was too good to pass up. $80,000 for a 6-bedroom waterfront Dutch colonial that would have gone for twice that without the history. The furnishings were included, everything the DeFeos had left behind. Even the High Hopes sign was still out front. "We can make new memories here," Kathy said as they signed the papers. She squeezed George's hand. "A fresh start for all of us." George nodded, but something in his gut twisted. He'd heard the stories. Everyone in Amityville had. But he wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. "It's just a house," he told the realtor with a forced grin. "Bricks and wood." The realtor smiled back, but her eyes didn't reach her smile. "Sure, just a house." Moving day was cold and gray. The kids ran through the rooms, claiming bedrooms with shrieks of delight. Danny took the one that had been Dawn DeFeo's. Chris picked Mark's old room. Missy, the youngest, wanted the smallest one upstairs, the one with the quarter-circle window that looked like a half-closed eye. Harry, the dog, immediately began sniffing every corner, tail wagging furiously at first. Then, in the basement, he stopped. His hackles rose. A low growl rumbled in his throat as he clawed at a section of the wall near the furnace. "Easy, boy," George said, pulling him away. "Probably just a mouse." That first night, they all slept soundly, almost too soundly. But at 3:15 a.m., George's eyes snapped open. He didn't know why. The clock on the nightstand glowed green in the darkness. 3:15 exactly. His heart was hammering like he'd been running. Beside him, Kathy breathed evenly, undisturbed. The house was silent. George got up, padded downstairs in his socks, and checked the locks. Everything was secured. He poured himself a glass of water from the kitchen tap and stared out the window at the river. The water looked black and oily under the moonlight. When he went back to bed, he told himself it was nothing, just new house jitters. Day 3. The changes started small. George woke up again at 3:15 a.m. the next night, and the night after that. He began keeping a mental note. Always the same time. The exact window when the DeFeo family had been slaughtered. Kathy noticed he was irritable during the day. "You're chopping enough wood for a whole winter," she teased one afternoon as George swung the axe in the backyard with unnecessary force. Sweat poured down his face despite the December chill. The axe blade bit deep into the logs, splitting them with sharp cracks that echoed across the water. "I'm fine," he grunted, but his eyes had a distant look, like he was listening to something only he could hear. The kids adapted quickly. Missy found an imaginary friend she called Jody. She'd talk to the empty air in her room, giggling at jokes no one else heard. "Jody says the house likes us," she told her mother one evening over dinner. "He says we can stay forever if we're good." Kathy smiled indulgently. That's nice, honey. What's Jody look like? Missy tilted her head, her small face suddenly serious. He has red eyes, like when Harry gets mad at the mailman, but bigger. Danny and Chris laughed it off as kid stuff. But that night, Danny woke up to the sound of scratching at his bedroom door. When he opened it, no one was there, just cold air that smelled faintly of gun oil and something sweeter, rotting flowers. Harry the dog refused to go into the basement anymore. He'd sit at the top of the stairs, whining, ears flat against his skull. On the fourth night, Kathy found the toilets overflowing with thick black sludge. Not sewage, something thicker, like tar mixed with ink. It wouldn't flush. When George plunged it, the stuff bubbled up and left stains on the porcelain that wouldn't scrub out. Old pipes, George muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. That same evening, Kathy walked into Missy's room and found the rocking chair moving by itself. Back and forth. Creak. 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 Missy sat on the floor, smiling at nothing. "Jody's playing," the little girl said happily. Kathy felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Her breath fogged in the air. "Missy, stop that! It's not funny!" "But Mommy, I'm not doing it!" The chair kept rocking. Week 1. The eyes. George started waking at 3:15 a.m. every single night. He'd stand at the window overlooking the river, staring at the boathouse. Sometimes he thought he saw movement down there, shadows that were too tall to be raccoons. One night he went outside with a flashlight. The beam cut through the fog rolling off the water. As he approached the bulkhead, he heard it, a low whispering like dozens of voices speaking at once, too soft to make out words, but impossible to ignore. They seemed to come from the house itself, seeping through the clapboard siding. He spun around. For a split second, he thought he saw faces in the upstairs windows. Pale, wide-eyed faces pressed against the glass. Children. Then they were gone. Back inside, Kathy was waiting in the kitchen, wrapped in a robe. "George, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Just checking the property." She touched his arm. Her hand was ice cold. "You're burning up. And your eyes, they look different." He pulled away. "I'm fine." But he wasn't. That night, in bed, he dreamed of the DeFeo family. They were all standing in the hallway, faces down, hands raised. Blood dripped slowly from their wounds, pooling on the carpet. Big Ron lifted his head just enough to look at George with empty sockets. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. "It remembers." George woke screaming at exactly 3:15 a.m. Week 2. The slime and the flies. The green slime appeared first in the upstairs hallway. It oozed from the seams where the wallpaper met the baseboards, thick, gelatinous, glowing faintly under the lights, like something bioluminescent from the bottom of the ocean. It smelled like decay and sulfur. When George tried to wipe it up with a rag, it burned his skin, leaving red welts that blistered overnight. Kathy called a priest. Father Mancuso from the local parish agreed to come bless the house. He arrived on a windy afternoon, carrying holy water and a crucifix. The moment he stepped through the front door, the wind outside howled louder. Inside, every door in the house slammed shut simultaneously. The temperature plummeted. Father Mancuso began the blessing in the living room. "In the name of the Father and of the Son." A voice cut through the air, deep and guttural, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. "Get out!" The priest froze. His face went pale. "Who said that?" No one answered. He continued, voice shaking. As he sprinkled holy water in Missy's room, the little girl screamed. Jody doesn't like that. He says you're hurting him. Father Mancuso's hand suddenly blistered and as if burned by acid. He dropped the vial. It shattered, and the holy water sizzled on the floor like it had hit a hot skillet. "Get out!" The voice roared again, louder this time. It vibrated through the floorboards. The priest fled, clutching his burned hands. "This place, it's not right. There's something here that doesn't belong to God." He never came back. That night, the flies arrived. Hundreds of them, black, buzzing clouds, swarmed in the sewing room on the second floor, even though it was December and the windows were sealed tight. They covered the walls, the ceiling, the DeFeo family's old sewing machine that had been left behind. Kathy tried to swat them, but they reformed instantly, thicker. George smashed at them with a rolled-up newspaper. One landed on his arm. When he crushed it, instead of blood, a tiny drop of green slime oozed out. The next morning, the flies were gone, but the slime had spread to the ceilings, dripping slowly like pus from an infected wound. Week 3. Jody and the Red Room. Missy stopped talking to anyone except Jody. She'd sit for hours in her room staring at the quarter-circle window. "He has a snout," she told Danny once, "and big red eyes that glow in the dark. He says the house was built on bad ground, Indian ground, where they buried the crazy ones." Danny didn't laugh anymore. He'd started having nightmares about hands reaching up from under his bed, small hands like his siblings. One evening, George was in the basement trying to fix the furnace when Harry began digging frantically at the wall again, growling, snarling, foam at his mouth. "Damn it, dog!" George snapped. He grabbed a sledgehammer and swung it at the spot. Plaster crumbled. Behind it was a small hidden room, no bigger than a closet. The walls inside were painted blood red. The moment the room was exposed, a wave of nausea hit George. He staggered back. For a second, he saw his own face reflected in the red paint, but older, twisted, eyes glowing with malevolent hunger. The face smiled at him with too many teeth. He sealed the room back up with plywood and nails, but the smell of rot lingered in the basement forever after. That same night, Kathy levitated. George woke at 3:15 a.m. to find his wife floating 6 inches above the mattress, her body rigid, eyes wide open but unseeing. A thin stream of green slime dripped from the corner of her mouth. "Kathy!" He grabbed her, pulling her down. She was ice cold, and for a moment her face aged, wrinkles deepening, hair turning gray, skin sagging like a 90-year-old crone. Then she gasped, collapsing into his arms as a normal 30-year-old again. "I saw them," she whispered, trembling. "The family. They were standing around the bed, watching us. Their eyes, they were empty." The final days. The house awakens. By the 25th day, the Lutzes were barely sleeping. George had stopped going to work. He spent hours chopping wood in the backyard, swinging the axe with manic intensity, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Sometimes he'd stop and stare at the house, whispering to himself. The voices were clearer now, not just... handprints on the children's bedroom walls. Prints too small for adults, too large for the kids. They wouldn't wash off. Missy refused to leave her room. Jody says if we go, he'll be lonely. He wants us to play forever. On the 27th night, the entire family woke to the sound of marching feet upstairs. Dozens of footsteps, heavy and rhythmic, like soldiers on parade. But when George ran up with a baseball bat, the second floor was empty. Only the quarter-circle windows stared back at him, reflecting his moon-terrified face. At 3:15 a.m. on the 28th day, all hell broke loose. The walls began to bleed. Not metaphorically. Thick, dark blood seeped from the seams, running in rivulets down the wallpaper, pooling on the floors. The temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. Harry the dog howled in pure terror and ran headlong into a wall, knocking himself unconscious. The children screamed as invisible hands lifted their beds off the ground, shaking them violently. Missy floated toward the ceiling, giggling maniacally. "Jody wants to show me his real face." George grabbed an axe. Not the chopping one, but the emergency fire axe from the garage. He stood in the hallway, eyes wild, as the whispering voices rose to a deafening chorus. "Get out, or stay with us forever." Kathy clutched the children, her face streaked with tears and slime. "George, we have to go, now!" But George hesitated. Part of him, the part that had been listening to the house for weeks, wanted to stay, to swing the axe, to finish what Butch DeFeo had started. The red-eyed pig appeared then. It wasn't imaginary. Not anymore. A massive, demonic snout pressed against the living room window from outside, glowing red eyes boring into George's soul. Its breath fogged the glass in the shape of cloven hoofprints. "George!" Kathy screamed. He dropped the axe. They ran. They fled with only the clothes on their backs, leaving everything behind: furniture, clothes, toys, even Harry's leash. As they piled into the car, George looked back one last time. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue stood silent under the moonlight. The quarter-circle windows glowed faintly, like eyes that had finally blinked. But inside, deep in the walls, something remembered. It always would. The Lutzes never returned. They told their story to anyone who would listen, though many called it a hoax. Priests, reporters, skeptics, they all had opinions. But the house didn't care what people said. It waited, quiet, patient, remembering the blood, the voices, the family that had fed it once, and wondering when the next one would come. High hopes still hung crooked on the front lawn, faded letters barely legible. The house had all the time in the world. End of chapter 1. Word count, approximately 10,200. This sets up the full horror arc: psychological descent, escalating supernatural phenomena, family tension, and the house as a malevolent living entity. The thriller elements come from the slow erosion of sanity, the creepy child imaginary friend turning demonic, George's growing aggression, and the constant 3:15 a.m. dread. If you'd like Chapter 2 or expansions on specific scenes, let me know. The story draws from documented details: the murders at 3 a.m. Story 2, The Farm That Breathes. Harrisville, Rhode Island. December 1970. The old Arnold estate stood at the end of a round-top row, like a forgotten scar on the New England landscape. Built in 1736, the sprawling 14-room farmhouse squatted on 8.5 acres of rocky soil and whispering woods. Its gray clapboard siding had weathered 2 centuries of harsh winters, and the massive stone chimney rose from the center like a crooked finger pointing at the sky. Locals in Harrisville rarely spoke its name aloud. They just called it the old place and drove past a little faster after dark. Roger and Carolyn Perrin thought they'd found paradise. Roger, a traveling jewelry salesman with a strong back and practical mind, saw dollar signs in the low price. Carolyn, with her warm smile and 5 energetic daughters, dreamed of fresh air apple trees and a quiet life away from the chaos of their previous home. Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and little April tumbled out of the station wagon that cold December day, their laughter echoing across the frozen fields. The previous owners had left only one warning as they handed over the keys. For the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. Carolyn laughed it off. Old houses have their quirks, she said, squeezing Roger's hand. We'll make it ours. The house seemed to welcome them at first. The wide plank floors creaked softly underfoot, almost like a contented sigh. The big kitchen smelled of wood smoke and faint cinnamon. The girls claimed bedrooms upstairs, fighting over who got the room with the slanted ceiling and the tiny window that looked out over the barn. That first night, the family slept deeply, too deeply. But at 3:07 a.m., the house took its first breath. The first whispers, winter 1971. It started small, harmless, almost playful. Carolyn would set the broom against the wall in the kitchen, only to find it standing in the middle of the floor the next morning, perfectly balanced on its bristles. She'd hear the sound of sweeping at night when everyone was asleep. Once, she found a neat little pile of dirt in the exact center of the freshly mopped floor, as if someone had swept it there on purpose. Roger, the girls are playing tricks, she said one morning, laughing uneasily. But the girls swore they weren't. Andrea woke one night to the sound of someone humming an old lullaby right beside her bed. When she opened her eyes, she saw a woman in a long gray dress standing at the foot of the bed, smiling gently. The woman had kind eyes. Andrea felt no fear, only warmth. She told her mother the next day. Carolyn smiled and said it was probably just a dream. Then the cold spots appeared, pockets of freezing air that moved through the rooms like invisible guests. The girls would run through the hallway and suddenly shiver, their breath fogging even when the wood stove was roaring. One evening, Carolyn opened the icebox to grab an orange for April. As she sliced it, thick red liquid oozed out. Not juice, but something darker, warmer. It smelled metallic. She dropped the knife, heart pounding. When Roger came home, the orange was normal again, just pulp and seeds. You're tired, honey, he said, kissing her forehead. Country life takes getting used to. But Roger was gone a lot. On the road selling watches and rings. The house knew it. It waited for the moments when Carolyn was alone with the girls. The barn became off-limits. The family dog, a big mutt named Sadie, refused to go near it. She'd sit at the edge of the yard, whining, hackles raised, staring at the hayloft as if something was staring back. Cindy, the quiet one, started talking to the lady in the corner. She'd sit in the upstairs hallway for hours, nodding at empty space. She says her name is Bathsheba, Cindy whispered to Andrea one night. She used to live here a long time ago. She wants us to stay. Andrea felt a chill. She'd seen the woman, too. But now the smiles felt different. Hungrier. The breathing begins. Spring, summer, 1971. By March, the house was no longer content with small games. Doors slammed on their own, not gently, violently, like someone throwing them in rage. Footsteps echoed on the stairs at all hours, heavy boots followed by the lighter patter of children's feet. Sometimes the footsteps stopped right outside the girls' bedrooms and waited. The smell came next, a thick, sweet rot. Decaying flesh mixed with something like old perfume. It would fill a room suddenly, then vanish, leaving everyone gagging. One night, Nancy woke to find her bed shaking, not trembling, violently rocking from side to side. She screamed. When Carolyn ran in, the bed was still, but Nancy's sheets were soaked with icy sweat, and there were small bruises on her arms in the shape of fingerprints. The girls began seeing full apparitions. Christine saw a man hanging from the big tree behind the barn. His neck bent at a horrible angle, feet twitching. When she blinked, he was gone, but the branch still swayed. April, the youngest, woke up screaming that the man with no eyes was under her bed. She refused to sleep alone after that. Carolyn started changing. She'd fly into sudden rages over nothing, screaming at the girls, then crying uncontrollably. She'd find herself standing in the cellar with no memory of how she got there, holding a rusted knife from the 1800s that she didn't remember picking up. One afternoon, while hanging laundry outside, she felt hands on her shoulders. Strong, cold hands pushing her toward the well. She spun around. No one was there. But later that night, she dreamed of a woman with a twisted neck and black eyes whispering, "This land is mine. Your daughters will feed it." She woke with scratches on her chest, 3 deep parallel lines that burned for days. Roger still didn't believe. "It's an old house settling," he'd grunt. "Wood expands and contracts. That's all." But even he couldn't explain why the clock stopped at 3:07 a.m. every night, or why the radio would suddenly blast static and then play the same funeral hymn over and over. The house was breathing now, in, out, slow and deliberate. You could feel it if you stood still. The walls expanding slightly, then contracting like lungs made of timber and stone. Escalation. The attacks, 1972 to 1973. The spirits multiplied. There were the playful ones, children who giggled in the walls and moved toys around. The girls sometimes played hide and seek with them, but there were others, darker ones. A tall man in farmer's clothes appeared to Andrea in the mirror one morning. His face was gray, eyes sunken. He mouthed words she couldn't hear, but she felt the warning in her bones. "Get them out!" Bathsheba, if that was her real name, grew bolder. She targeted Carolyn hardest. The mother would levitate a few inches off the ground while doing dishes, her body rigid, eyes rolled back. Once she spoke in a voice that wasn't hers, a deep, guttural rasp in an old dialect no one understood. The girls found dead animals arranged in circles in the woods. Birds, squirrels, once a deer with its throat neatly cut. Cindy was dragged across her bedroom floor by her ankles one night, screaming. Bruises bloomed on her legs like ugly flowers. The cellar became a place of pure dread. Anyone who went down alone felt watched. Tools would fly off the walls. Once, Roger descended to fix the furnace and came back up pale, saying he'd heard a woman crying and then laughing right behind him. In the summer of 1973, the family held a makeshift séance at the kitchen table, more out of desperation than belief. They lit candles and joined hands. The table rose 6 inches off the floor and slammed down. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the windows inside the house. Carolyn's head snapped back. Her voice changed again, ancient, venomous. "I sacrificed for this land. You will sacrifice too." She described horrors. A baby pierced with a needle, blood on the floorboards, a curse that would make every mother kill her children before taking her own life. Roger ended it immediately, but the damage was done. After that, the attacks became physical and relentless. Carolyn was thrown down the stairs twice. She woke with bite marks on her legs. The girls heard knocking inside the walls. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. like a mocking heartbeat. At night, the entire house would groan and creak in rhythm, as if drawing breath and exhaling malice. The Warrens arrive, October 1973. Desperate, Carolyn reached out to Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigators. Ed, stocky and no-nonsense, and Lorraine, with her gentle but piercing psychic eyes, arrived one crisp autumn day. The moment they stepped onto the property, Lorraine clutched her cross. "There are many here," she whispered, "some lost, some angry, one consumed by hate." They set up equipment. Tape recorders caught disembodied voices. Children laughing, a woman screaming, "Get out!" and a deep male voice saying, "She owns you now." During a full investigation, Lorraine saw her clearly. Bathsheba Sherman, or whatever dark thing wore her name. A woman with a broken neck, head tilted at an impossible angle, black eyes full of centuries of rage. She had not lived in this exact house, but the land remembered her curse. Or perhaps something older and worse had simply taken her shape. The Warrens conducted a blessing. For a few weeks, the activity lessened. The breathing slowed. Then it returned stronger. One night during a séance, the Warrens tried to calm the spirits. Carolyn levitated fully off her chair, her body twisting in mid-air. She spoke in multiple voices, some male, some ancient. Her face aged decades in seconds, skin wrinkling, eyes sinking. Roger had seen enough. He ordered the Warrens to leave. "This is my family," he shouted. "No more!" But the house didn't care what Roger wanted. The final years. The house claims its own, 1974 to 1980. The Perrons stayed nearly 10 years. They had no choice. Money was tight, and Roger still refused to admit what was happening. The girls grew up with ghosts as playmates and tormentors. They learned which spirits were safe and which would slam you against the wall if you looked too long. Carolyn deteriorated. She'd disappear for hours, found later standing in the woods, staring at the big tree, murmuring about sacrifice. Scratches covered her body. She stopped sleeping. Her once bright eyes grew hollow. In 1977, April nearly drowned in the well after something pulled her toward it. Andrea saved her at the last second. The barn burned one night with no explanation. Flames that smelled of sulfur. When firefighters arrived, the fire went out as suddenly as it started, leaving perfect circles of scorched earth. By 1979, the house was breathing constantly. You could stand in any room and feel the subtle rise and fall of the walls, the floors pulsing like flesh. At 3:07 a.m., every clock stopped, and the whispers became a roar only the family could hear. Roger finally broke. One night he found Carolyn in the cellar with a rope, standing on a chair under a beam, eyes black as pitch. He dragged her out. The next morning, they packed what they could and left. They never sold the house. They simply walked away in 1980, leaving furniture, toys, and memories behind. As the last car pulled down the long driveway, Carolyn looked back. She swore she saw a woman standing in the upstairs window, neck bent, smiling with too many teeth. The house exhaled one long, satisfied breath. Epilogue. It still breathes. The Arnold estate still stands on Round Top Road. New owners come and go. Some last a year, some last less. They all report the same things. The broom that moves, the smell of rot, the footsteps, the cold hands in the dark. Some nights, if you drive past at 3:07 a.m., you can see every light in the house blazing, even though no one lives there anymore. And if you listen very carefully, you can hear it. In, out, the farm that breathes. It remembers every family that ever lived there. It hungers for the next one. And it has all the time in the world.